worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let me blind them with my big spotlight.
Was having a little bit of a problem with the reflections off the shiny board in the back.
Yes, that's why we're framed up so tight.
Yeah. I usually could work around it, so.
No dulling spray. I don't know what dulling spray would do to that material anyway.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
I'm just so used to like the do whatever you say. And you put the lights wherever you want until it's like people are covered in sweat.
Yeah.
I really, I think
Below a circuit.
our scientists
Like
need to learn how to figure out what
it's not.
I've seen those.
animals one can take to the moon.
Showed who the flight as the band was signing off, there was fire coming out of
Well, I think goats
No,
are probably
audience
the
thought
most
it was fast.
adaptable.
Yeah, none of them had any clue what was going on.
So,
Man, lights on, all of you get out of the fire. Very different world.
Yep.
Whew, looks like I gotta forward a bunch of
Oh yeah?
But,
Fire.
do that, but goats
Oh
are
man,
all over the
that's great.
place.
Yeah.
Bright, that's very bright light. Yeah.
Fish,
A lot of
that
outside
does as well
stuff.
too.
Okay, so fake sunlight.
Well, not that so much as more moonlight.
I'm toying with an idea.
Yeah.
So you can get it up really high. And
Get up really high, plus 12 by 12 silk.
My new this camera guy was that worked for Ari, and his brother
Maybe got feet and stuff like that.
Oh, good. Interesting. Let me find out.
yeah,
It's getting a little crowded over
you
here.
just drop like millions of dollars. This part of the city right now, you do that.
Yeah.
You go like line a street with whatever those
I looked at,
Radiation, or too much of this, too much of that, or there's an imbalance, more likely the animals will show it before the humans.
Yeah.
I did 2 film cuts, and we had a letter from the mayor that got us to do everything. I mean, there was one time we did a location from through downtown on a Saturday night. At 6 o'clock, and motorcycle escorts on either side of us, cop cars in front and back, and we just went 60 miles an hour. It was wonderful. Yeah. No, I wish I did. I also did a fun thing. Backwards, filming the car. You know, it was a dolly shot. And we were in front, and I was facing backwards with the air flex on my shoulder. And we did probably 2-3 miles.
It's always like
No seatbelt, of course.
you're just sitting back. Yeah.
If anything happened, the camera would have gone.
Someone else was using
We got a great shot.
That's why you have to start from scratch. You already know everyone. She made a big splash. Someone already was coming up to all the conferences before he got here with your name, so you didn't have any problem. Everyone already knows you have connections.
Well, yes, you should have chicken. They're just dirty.
I don't see it. My wife.
What about chickens? Where are chickens in space?
So let me see.
Egg every day?
I'm on US and guess
And you see if 616G really messes things up or not.
Maybe she just go upstairs.
So she's
I'll get another camera. I've got a nice big smart like 16 times mechanical zoom. It's a nice.
I've got a like adapter for this.
What about it's such nice. So that I bought this one.
Gotta go.
Well, I guess they're not willing to come back, or else they'll talk.
Let's go.
We never heard from you.
No, we didn't.
I mean, she had her name tag. I have your name tag. I have your name tag.
Was it
You just don't tell them.
Well,
You just do it.
well, at least you know, or at least she knows what's like.
I just like free sitting in here. This is to see if you're really ready for the Moon Mars environment.
You are living
That's it. We're just getting ready for the Moon Mars environment.
No, because actually,
Too messy.
when I met her last year, everything I talked to her and everything goes. I mean, what I see, honestly, I mean, yeah, I mean, I spoke to director, but when I get something from him, I just, when I get something.
I'm looking for my invitation.
Oh, and this is my dad. So he's a science tech. He's the founder of it. And
I think you met at
yeah, I see. Yeah, yeah.
Now,
We
we met in Berlin.
No, Bremen.
Bremen. I see, yeah. Now, okay. Chance to say
No,
hello.
and we're always interested in like the opportunities. So I think there's the things that we'll keep in touch on. And whenever you're in DC, let them know, and they'll take you out to the best.
We already made an appointment. Your ISC, you are coming. We are also going to be there. I'm waiting for them. You know, reservation of that.
How's your
Device. And I invited Hammond to come out.
We fly to Bremen.
But I was running an agreement with
I forgot to tell you, don't bring that up.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So,
sorry.
yeah, it was.
Okay.
Yeah, there's other things that we should do. Yeah, right, don't.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were
No.
doing it.
I just know.
When I go sit down.
So, tell me, so after this, where do you go afterwards?
Berlin. Oh no, I'm doing El Paso. Yeah, I'm doing the transit. So I feel like I would like to just go for one day and just like
Get away from it.
Oh, you said that in Holland too, so I don't know.
Because I go to Norway.
Yeah, I love that.
Where are you?
But I'm in New York.
My manager tells me, you know, that's the job is so high.
Oh, right up there?
Broadway.
I can have one of my daughters there.
Until now.
4 months. So I met him at the same time, and then he's like, I'm gonna start. And then they just changed everything.
Oh, wonderful. That's right.
No, he's just tired.
And wonderful.
I know. They don't want to talk about it. I thought I'm sorry, I'm afraid to get
I'll give you then they went through the other
Well, to be continued.
Let me ask for you to so
You shouldn't unless there's alcohol involved.
then
It's not me.
and my,
Very good, John.
I if you have to remind you, and I will remind you again tomorrow, that all of the discussions that happened in the working groups this afternoon should continue, both tonight during the dinner, tomorrow during the breaks, not during the presentations, and during the next couple of weeks. Because you now all have in the sign-up sheets, you now all have the emails of the other people who were in your group. So you can continue this discussion over the next week or 10 days. The window will close for the submission of ITBCs for this workshop in 2 weeks. So today is the 4th, tomorrow is the 5th, so November 19th is when the book will close. And then after that, it's no more contributions to this specific meeting. So, Giuseppe, any logistical announcements? So I think we're good? Okay. So we're going to close here in a minute. We'll go around now the room and ask each working group for a spokesperson. So working group 1.
So I'm Chris Nye for Working Group 1. We're focusing on the scenario alpha, which was government-sponsored exploration of an orbiting platform and work on the lunar surface of the moon, with the idea that the governments would then shift their focus to Martian exploration and what needed to be done on the surface of the moon to establish a presence that would allow for commercial development and a sustainable economy there before they left, specifically from the human spaceflight technological side. So we had some conversations about power standards, life support systems, what it means to be closed loop. Went back to the Tesla Edison DC-AC discussion, and started listing some questions to discuss for habitats, for what they would look like for lunar exploration activities.
Thank you. And of course, with the expectation that then tomorrow afternoon we'll have the more complete readout and some slides and all of that stuff. Okay, so working group number 2.
Coming up in a minute, can you accommodate a USB, a file on a USB?
You don't need slides this evening.
Oh, okay.
No slides this evening, only comments.
Okay.
You stand between me and a gin and tonic. I believe in working very hard, you could tell, but...
We broke out the problem into the timeline of midterm, and far term, as John had outlined, and we talked about a lot of the discussion was the sustainability of keeping the scientific staff on the base. How would they do the missions? That is, how the issues to be considered were how long would the research scientists stay? We are the science group, by the way. How long would the scientists stay? We need to find out more about human physiology on the moon, both in 16G and in how long, how much radiation protection they would need in the long term. The Apollo astronauts did not have much, but presumably these the scientific researchers would stay longer. The big issue was how many bases would they have? Where would they be located? At the very least, we figured with some input from John that at least one base should be on the far side of the moon for electromagnetic quiet. Also, regions of scientific interest like the South Pole, far side Aitken Basin region. We figured at least one base ought to be near the polar regions to look for volatiles in frozen craters. The scientific needs would have to be traded against logistical needs of supplying the base. The question of whether the base would be continuously habited, or at least in the near term, there would be periods where the base would have to maintain itself with no scientists on board. Also, how to rotate crew, and all these are open questions, how to rotate crews in order to avoid periods of time where there'd be nobody on board. The bases would presumably have overlapping crews. However, this would depend on the availability of transportation, assuming something like Orion or its SpaceX and Boeing equivalents or Blue Origin equivalent would hold, let's say, 4, and you had a base that accommodated 4. How long they would stay and whether or not they would overlap would depend on overlapping crews. As far as the science goes, again, South Pelican Basin, observatories on the far side for radio astronomy, optical astronomy, regions of the moon of interest, and we looked at the breakdown of science of the moon, for the moon, and from the moon. For the moon would be research we can do right now on Earth to enable lunar research, such as data mining from zero-G exposure ISS, building in the short run, a habitat in low Earth orbit that could test 1.6G, and other enabling technology that we can do right now for as far as human physiology and technology goes to enable a base on the moon. For the moon, on the moon would be lunar geology, and from the moon would be astronomy. So we broke it down at John's recommendation in that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Seth. And the last of the scenario-focused discussions, Team 3. A quick trip to Dallas.
Yes, Fort Worth. So we started off with 5 catalytic presentations that ranged from power to transportation to telepresent avatars, mechanical avatars, if you will, on the moon, and 3D printing. So those were our catalytic presentations. In the transition to the charts that you sent, thank you, we got off on the Moon Village principles and spent a lot of discussion on standards, the first principle, and how there are so many standards organizations and standards that need to be addressed, and should Moon Village address them? Does Moon Village Association want to address them? And if they did, how do they pay for them? And why don't we incorporate the existing standards groups to focus on the moon things? So we spent a lot of time on that, and thank you, Dennis. Where is he? Where is he? Thank you. And then we got off onto the scenario, and we were all over the map. We talked about who, what, when, where, why at any point in time. We identified some players, we identified some stuff, we identified some products, we identified when, and we kind of looked at the timeline and said, and thank you, Dallas, the first timeline, if BFR is successful, we'll have the foundation to do everything on the moon ready to grow by 2030, and so maybe we don't need 2 timelines below that, but then we could do industrial growth on the moon, transition heavy industry to the moon in the midterm, and then the far term, or even by 2040, we would have full industrialization of low lunar orbit to build interplanetary spaceships from lunar material, and so everything's good.
Thank you. So I will just observe, of course, I'm assuming that it was only because of the need for brevity that groups 1 and 2 did not talk about their extended discussion of the Moon Village principles, which I'm sure both groups had. Are you talking to me?
We're trying to figure out a way for all of us to get along in those little classrooms.
No, I understand. Anyway, the only reason I bring that up is just to remind everyone, you as individuals should be looking at and thinking about the principles and the idea of such principles in addition to the discussions this afternoon. So please do. If you didn't get a copy, I have more copies. No, I know. If you didn't get a copy. Because I don't have a single mailing list with all the people who are actually here.
You have a list in the book?
Yes, I know, but it's, forgive me, that's in a Word document, and I'm not cutting and pasting it this evening. I can send it out later. Again, it will be open for a couple of weeks. I will certainly do it after this meeting, but I would like to get your thoughts before we adjourn.
You said they're up here? Hard copies are up there?
Hard copies are right up here.
Okay.
So, Working Group 4, cross-cutting. Please.
No slides.
Not all the slides.
No slides.
I'm not going to present slides.
Good. You may use your crib sheet, but don't show anything.
Okay. For the
Step into the light and step into the camera.
okay. For perhaps the 2 people in the room that don't know who I am,
who I am. I'm Gary Barnhart. All right, I'm speaking for Group 4, which was the top line discussion is economics, missions, and markets. We took on a number of different issues that were fairly wide-ranging, given our areas of interest in those regards. Our first catalytic presentation was on energy and utilities, which evolved into a rather extensive discussion on interfaces, both material, energy, and data. There was clearly noted that there's a difference between organic and evolvable issues versus dictated issues in these regards, and that the choice of interface planes, both for software and hardware, are critical to both interoperability and standardization being achieved, and that this is an economic driver that has cascading impacts throughout all of the systems. We had, so we need to make those choices carefully, and MVA has an opportunity to play a significant role in how this conversation evolves in reaching the consensus in that as appropriate. There's a catalytic presentation on evolved transactional management, dealing with data transfers, monetary transfers, et cetera, evolutions from blockchain technology and related things. Oddly enough, I was asked to translate. Go figure. Okay. But in all seriousness, as we evolve to dynamic communications technologies and applications and make the Internet of Things real, it's kind of happened on the moon too, folks, okay, and we need to understand that. This notion of fostering the connections needed to transform discussions to actualization. We had another catalytic presentation that basically laid out a set of processes to arrive at ISRU utilization, from one team's perspective. Okay, how do you translate that discussion into something that's actualized? It's a challenge that's before us, and one of the suggestions that came out of that was, in part, the notion of a actionable or activatable meme or a set of heuristics, if you will. And one that was offered up was, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to put women on the moon. Okay? When you start doing that from the perspective of a general connection to society as a whole, the implications of that start rolling out in any number of very, very interesting and potentially compelling ways to engage a much wider audience. In general, also this notion of how you foster cooperation, collaboration, and competition. There was some offering up of some words of wisdom from what happened to make space station real in the robotics area, which were truly hard-fought lessons learned in those regards. We talked in production. We're over? Yeah, okay. The upshot of it is we took the charge in terms of talking also of production issues and things we can sell to Earthlings, things that we're going to have to, that the Moonies will have to sell to themselves, and address the issues of how things are playing together. Some of the implications that we need to come to terms with, the legal framework for offshore accounts. How do we avoid moon tar?
Okay, thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. Okay. Tomorrow.
Did you get that line? That's actually very important.
Yes.
How do we avoid moon tar?
I understand. So, now, last but not least, Working Group 5. Cross-cutting.
Cross-cutting. Okay, well, we were the cross-cutting how, and as soon as we got together, we realized we had a very large group, so we immediately split into fours in terms of things. So the different areas that we covered was culture, this coordination and cooperation, analogs, as well as outreach. I'm just going to quickly sum up those different groups. In the analogs group, we identified areas that one could do analog testing. Also, we highlighted we will have in the package a reference material with other past NASA work that reference analogs of the past that might be helpful for people that are wanting to do that. In terms of the outreach folks, they mainly worked on how to engage the mainstream media as well as the citizenry. And one of the things that we identified in the analogs group that actually cross-cut across all of them was we've had activities in the past. DARPA is famous for their grand challenges, as well as NASA has the centennial challenges. So these are things that actually hit the outreach, culture, and analogs, as well as fostering a level of cooperation. In terms of the cooperation and coordination, basically coming up with stuff that identifies the abilities of the different potential partners and figuring out ways of settling disputes in terms of disagreements that may come up. And in terms of the culture part, we had a special request on this one, why the moon? And our culture group was very deep. So,
do you want me to take the why the moon or not? I have something from the person that led that, and she sent me an email. Do you want?
Well,
do you have it?
that's what I was going to do, but you're welcome to do it if you want to. Okay. Well, one of the things that caught my eye was when Christopher Columbus arrived in America, he was the catalyst that ultimately resulted in development of jazz and many other cultural breakthroughs. It also led to some horrible cultural developments. So the role for the Moon Village Association then is to make sure that when we develop a community on the moon, we guide it to produce jazz and not slavery. So anyways, and would you like to do the why the moon?
All right, okay. So there was a why the moon? Am I in the right light? Okay. So why the moon from a cultural standpoint? This is Michelle put this together, Michelle Hanlon. The moon overview effect. You've heard of the Earth overview effect. Well, we decided there was also a moon overview effect. The moon has inspired humanity for as long as we have been able to record our history. It has inspired centuries of art and music. It has generated myth. Think of the Wolf Man. Think of lunatics. Okay, so like most of us. It is globally recognized as a familiar figure. It has even organized time for us. Think of the calendar. This celestial body has been an incredible influence in all of our lives from afar. Imagine the inspiration it will offer as we become even more familiar with it, explore it, and get close to it.
So, I think we have a very solid foundation for the continuing discussions this evening. 6:30, dinner, Radisson Hotel, second floor. And tomorrow, as we continue and eventually complete this event. I will give you a teaser, which is that we also have an impromptu announcement that will be made tomorrow, which will involve something that I think Pete Gerritsen is willing to share with us, but I don't want to do it this evening because we've run a little late. That this evening at the dinner, we will be doing the signing of an MOU between the Moon Village Association and For All Moonkind. With that, I will ask if anyone has any high-level question or comment or something for today's event? Please.
I thought Aggie was gonna come in and mention this. I found,
Oh, she was supposed to, but,
okay.
so,
So, just really, really briefly, I found, some money in the women's bathroom, so might check your.
Oh.
we talked about that. We knew there'd be one. We knew that.
So, you, everybody check their pockets.
Yeah, if you happen to use the ladies' room, check your cash.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. With that, let me say good evening and thank you so much for all of your efforts today. Thank you.
Yeah, we are.